I think without further ado, and to ensure that we get through all our content today, we're going to kick off now. And so thanks very much, T, and thanks again, members, very much for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedules, especially at this time of year, to be joining us for these sessions. It's really greatly appreciated. I will repeat some of the comments and the opening remarks that I made during the previous session, as some of you may not have been able to attend that, and I think it's just important to give some background and context. As I say, I will just reiterate some of those comments. But the first session covered sections 1 to 6 of the returns, and this section is going to cover sections 7 to 12 of these returns. And the idea is really to guide members through each section of the return and make sure that you have the clarity needed to make strong, informed submissions, both to us and to the FSCA. And I think to just give a quick recap, the Omni risk return really represents a significant shift from how the FSCA had originally proposed to obtain this data from the industry in the form of the Omni conduct of business returns. And the idea is that they want to collect data on conduct risks, on governance quality, on operational resilience, institutional stability, and the like. And it's a move beyond the traditional purely financial reporting that we've all done up to now, and means that the regulator will have a comprehensive lens through which to assess how firms manage customer outcomes, compliance, and systemic risks. And why this is really important for you as regulated entities is to ensure that when the time comes, that you can make accurate and complete submissions. Because the FSCA is going to be using this data to develop a risk profile of each entity, essentially identifying early warning signals of conduct or governance weaknesses, and benchmarking performance against all your peers in the industry, and prioritizing supervisory interventions where it matters most. This will essentially be the first phase of this project, and the insights will inform the second phase, which will potentially see enhanced reporting obligations for higher risk businesses. So I think, again, and I know that I'm repeating this for those of you who were in the first session, but I think it bears repeating. It is important. So the consultation period for this round and these Omni risk returns is running from the 1st of October to the 30th of November 2025. The ultimate implementation will be aligned with the FSCA's Integrated Regulatory Solution, or IRS, which is expected to go live in 2026. And we're very pleased to advise that the intention at this stage is that the reporting will only be required annually, although this will be subject to review. Previously, with the Omni conduct of business returns, the regulator had proposed quarterly reporting, which we pushed back on very strenuously. It was our view that that was overly onerous and unnecessary. I mean, what was the regulator going to do with that volume of data and at that frequency? And nevertheless, they have indicated it will still be subject to ongoing review and consideration and may be adjusted over time as the risk model evolves and they refine their supervisory approach over the longer term. But regardless of that, depending on the various states of readiness across the financial institutions and individual sectors, bearing in mind that these returns are going to be completed by banks, by intermediaries, by insurers, by credit providers, and essentially every type of regulated entity which is overseen by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. So they're potentially looking to roll this out on a staggered or phased implementation approach, but that will form part of broader industry engagements in the future. As we mentioned previously, while we're going through these sections today, and when you're looking at it yourself, the FSCA is primarily looking for input on the following aspects. Firstly, whether and to what extent the requested information is currently available within your business. Secondly, if the data is currently being collected and stored and maintained, and whether you're easily able to extract and report on this information in the manner that's being requested. And also, if it's not being collected, an indication of how much time you might need to be able to report on that data. And alternatively, what data points do you have in your business that might already meet the objectives without specifically, providing it in the way that they're currently requesting it. From our perspective, what we also suggest that you do is that you look and determine whether you actually understand what is being requested. And I'll just make reference particularly to section 6 that we had covered in our previous section, where they talk about things like assets under management and what you manage or hold on behalf of a client. But based on discussions with the regulator, in fact, what they're suggesting is that what you should be reporting on the value of the book over which you provide advice. And that's not clear. So where there are items like that there is a lack of clarity, ask those questions in your submissions. Also, how easy or difficult would it be for you to obtain the information? What costs do you envisage would be involved in obtaining the data or developing systems to support the data? And are there any specific definitions or terminology that require clarification, either that have been included in the terminology section already and the descriptor is not clear, or that there's wording used within the sections that hasn't been defined and in respect of which you require a definition? Also, are there potential scenarios where the information requested may not be available or known to you? For example, where product providers don't notify intermediaries of client-initiated changes. As we've mentioned previously, there are 12 sections in the Omni Risk Return. Today, we're covering sections 7 to 12. I think from our perspective, these are and I'm going to put it in inverted commas, easier sections. I think they're less taxing than sections 1 to 6 and more familiar type of information that we've seen before, with the exception possibly of section 10, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go. And then just finally, before we get into the nitty-gritty, again, a general note. Throughout these returns, we made it previously, but I think I'm going to just repeat it again. If you're not an accountable institution, you will not be required to provide responses to the sections that relate to accountable institutions. The same also relates to sections that pertain to credit providers and market infrastructures. And we did ask the FIA whether, the return that you actually get to complete, you'll only see sections that are applicable to your business during the pilot. But they haven't been able to confirm, although they did think that sections would be grayed out if they wouldn't be relevant to you. Again, when you're looking at providing feedback to us and the regulator, it's really not sufficient to simply state that the requirements are overly onerous. You need to specify why. Why would you not be able to provide the data? These are substantially simpler than the conduct of business returns. We do recognize that there may be some challenges in certain sections, but be specific and be clear on what you would need to do and the steps that you'd need to take and the costs that may be involved in you being able to obtain that data. What we've done in terms of how we're providing this feedback to you through the different sections is to indicate to you what the purpose of the information request is, and what you might need to think about as a business, and also it'll help you maybe take steps in your business that will allow you to be able to complete the returns. And then we've also highlighted some aspects that might be perceived as red flags for the regulator. Also, just as a point of note, if the answer is 0 or no, then you'll need to reflect a 0, as blank fields won't be accepted, and the FIA have confirmed that. Just lastly, before I move on to section 7, there is some important information about your submissions, both to us and the regulator, that I'm going to cover at the end. Please, this is extremely important, so indulge us and do just stay on for those last closing moments, because it really will have a bearing on whether your comments are taken into account or not. And so without further ado, I'm going to move on to sharing the sections with you and get into some of the detail. Brad, can you just confirm to me if you can see the screen?
Perfect, Sam.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Right. So Section 7 deals with product agreements, products and agreement terminations. And the purpose of the section is really to examine customer exit patterns and transaction settlement failures as indicators of product suitability, customer satisfaction, and operational resilience. We did raise the question with the regulator about the potential for double counting in this section, and the fact that you might be answering it and an insurer might be answering it or some other product provider. And what they advised us is that they're looking at the entity on a standalone basis. So they're not looking at you in comparison to the insurer's data and checking if they correspond and align. It's that, do you have the data available on lapsed products of your clients, cancelled product of your clients, surrendered products, etc., etc. And again, we also indicated to the regulator that you may not always have the information. For example, if your client gave instructions directly to the provider. And the FIA's view is that you must have this data. And if you don't, it would be a flag that you're not engaging adequately with your clients. And if you're not getting the information from the product provider, you should be. And you should take measures to engage with the provider to ensure that they are sharing data in relation to your clients with you appropriately. But again, if there are specific challenges around that, you do need to highlight that and flag that. Again, as we've noted in previous sections, all monetary values in this return must be recorded in South African Rand using the prevailing conversion rate, and that is specific to this section. So then moving on to subsection 7.1, product and financial services agreement terminations and trade cancellations. This section aims to assess the stability of customer relationships and product suitability. So high customer-driven terminations would signal dissatisfaction, poor design, or aggressive sales. And institution-initiated terminations may indicate de-risking or discriminatory criteria. So high cancelled or failed trades would also point to operational weaknesses. So I think that areas that members need to think about as potential red flags for the FIA would be things like unusually high customer termination rates relative to industry peers, a pattern of institution-initiated terminations affecting specific customer segments, a high failed trade rates, and I've highlighted this section, so sections F and G. If you're not trading and you're not performing activities in relation to dealing on an exchange, again, this is one that you don't have to answer and you'll simply put zeros in this section. But nevertheless, those would be things that would be flags for the regulator. And then a rapid growth in terminations year on years would indicate an emerging problem. Again, as I've noted in relation to sections F and G, section J as well deals with the total number of credit ratings withdrawn. So again, if this isn't applicable to you, you would simply put a zero there. Section 7.2 deals with fixed term withdrawal investments. First off, I've highlighted this in green to indicate that this only needs to be answered by accountable institutions. And again, if you're not dealing with any fixed term investments, your answers here would be zero. But in essence, the section looks to determine the scale of premature disinvestment, and this is beyond conduct concerns. Frequent early withdrawals would potentially indicate money laundering and counter-financing terrorism risks, such as layering or structuring. And high early withdrawals also signal product vulnerability to misuse. So things, if you are operating in this space that you want to think about and potentially take action, early withdrawals from fixed-term products might indicate customer financial stress or product dissatisfaction. And again, high early withdrawal rates correlate with unsuitable product design or aggressive sales tactics targeting unsophisticated investors. So there, I've kind of given you some insight into things that you as a business need to think about in relation to your customers, but where the FIA also may pay particular attention would be a high proportion of early withdrawals, a pattern of customer-initiated early withdrawals despite there being penalties, and evidence of aggressive sales tactics for fixed-term products, especially to retail customers. I'm now going to move on to section 8, And Brad is going to take on this section relating to advertising and communications. Brad, over to you.
Great. Thank you for getting the ball rolling, Samantha Williams. And again, thank you for two members for taking time away from your business to join us. And Sam and I really hope that by working through these sections together, we can help clarify exactly what the regulator is requesting from you through this Omni risk return. Okay, on to section 8. So members, this really relates to advertising and communication of your business. The purpose here is really for the regulator to assess market practices within your business, any risk of customer mis-selling, as well as the quality of customer communications and disclosures that are made by the business. As per some of the previous sections of the return, all monetary values in this return must be recorded in South African Rand using the prevailing conversion rate as at the relevant date specified in the return. So on to subsection 8.1. This speaks to the advertising channels that have been used by your business to distribute your marketing material. So what the FIA is looking for here is the range and suitability of the advertising channels that you use, as different channels pose varying conduct risks. Some channels may be prone to mis-selling or targeting vulnerable customers. Points to keep in mind when completing this section of the return are that digital channels such as social media or online platforms have grown substantially, and so also present elevated sustainability of suitability, I beg your pardon, and targeting risks. Some channels are prone to mis-selling, for example, high pressure, direct sales, and social media influencer endorsements. So this is something for members to look out for should you be using these specific channels to market your business. As you will know, advertising copy should be fair. It should not be misleading and compliant with applicable conduct standards. Some of the areas that might catch the regulator's attention include any over-reliance on aggressive channels, targeted advertising to vulnerable customer segments without appropriate safeguards, as well as a history of complaints or regulatory concerns relating to the advertising kind of vehicle that you choose to use. Scrolling down to subsection 8.2, thank you very much, Sam. This speaks to your advertising expenditure. Here, the section really looks to measure the scale of marketing resources that you have. High expenditure may signal to the regulator aggressive sales strategies, increasing unsuitable product promotion risk. So these are items for members to consider when answering this specific subsection. Members should also be aware that any high advertising spend may signal to the regulator aggressive growth or competitive pressure in the eyes of the regulator. Rapidly rising spend may also indicate market stress or acquisition strategies. So in summary, members, your spend on advertising really should correlate with business growth or market expansion. In this instance, what might raise questions for the regulator, this would include any disproportionately high advertising spend relative to revenue and growth, as would rapid advertising spend growth without corresponding revenue growth, as well as spend concentrated in high pressure channels such as telemarketing or aggressive digital campaigns. As we scroll down to subsection 8.3, this relates to any amendments to your advertising materials. In this instance, the aim here is really to identify the frequency of misleading or incorrect advertising requiring correction. So any high amendments may suggest to the FSCA deficiencies in your own internal oversight or an over-reliance on external services. Members should really ensure here that they have documented procedures in place to identify incorrect or misleading materials, as well as a process and timeframes to remedy these where identified. Similarly, areas that might warrant increased scrutiny by the regulator include a high frequency of amendments indicating to the regulator poor quality control by your business. Any pattern of similar amendments or repeat failures would also suggest to the regulator systemic issues, as well as any delayed amendments remaining in the market for extended periods. So causes matter here, whether it is a lack of compliance expertise versus deliberate non-compliance. And in the last subsection here, 8.4 relates to direct customer communications. Here, the regulator is really looking to assess the frequency and appropriateness of your direct or non-marketing communication. Insufficient or inadequate communication may also signal to the regulator poor disclosure, lack of responsiveness, or disengagement by the business. So members, for clarity, non-marketing material might include any monthly sort of comms or newsletter inserts that you send to your customer base, as well as marketing updates and the like. I think here important aspects for members to note are that regular, clear customer communications improve transparency and reduce complaints. I think you can see the correlation there. Your communication frequency should match your product type. For example, investment products warrant regular performance statements. Inadequate communication may suggest to the regulator governance weakness or a lack of customer centricity. For the FECA, an absence of regular direct communications could suggest disengagement. Other areas that might warrant scrutiny from the regulator would relate to communications that fail to disclose key information or risks. A high proportion of customer complaints about communication gaps would certainly raise red flags in the eyes of the FSCA and would present evidence to the regulator that customers may feel uninformed about their investments or obligations. And members, that is section 8. Colleague, could you move us through to section 9, please? Magic, thank you. Okay, section 9, your complaints management process and protocols. Right, members, before I get into the subsection of this particular section of the return, I just wanted to start with the definition of a complaint that is to be applied when completing this section of the return. The FIA's General Code of Conduct defines a complaint as, and this is verbatim, an expression of dissatisfaction by a person to a provider or to the knowledge of the provider, to the provider service supplier relating to a financial product or financial service provider or offered by that provider, which indicates or alleges, regardless of whether such an expression of dissatisfaction is submitted together with or in relation to a client query, that A, the provider or its service supplier has contravened or failed to comply with an agreement, a law, a rule, or a code of conduct which is binding on the provider or to which it subscribes. B, that the provider or its service supplier's maladministration or willful or negligent action or failure to act has caused the person harm, prejudice, distress, or substantial inconvenience. Or C, that the provider or its service suppliers has treated the person unfairly. With that said, members, the purpose of the section, once again, is really to assess the complaints volume and patterns as indicators of conduct issues within your business, as well as to evaluate your own complaints handling effectiveness and accountability. Subsection 9.1 of the specific section relates to the volume of complaints that your business has received. Here, the subsection really aims to assess the overall scale of customer dissatisfaction and detect any emerging trends within your business. High complaint volumes relative to a customer base signal systemic product or service weaknesses in the eyes of the regulator. Members are reminded that when you develop your complaints register, you should keep in mind that complaint volumes should be contextualized against your own customer base size. Emerging trends matter more than just your total number of complaints. Rising complaints rates signal emerging issues in the eyes of the regulator. Product or segment concentration in complaints also highlights problem areas. In this vein, the regulator will pay particular attention to instances whereby a complaint rate is significantly above industry peers, as well as any rapid increase in complaints, which may also suggest emerging systemic issues within your business. Also, any complaints that are concentrated in specific products or channels may indicate a process gap. Subsection 9.2 speaks to the complaints resolution process or system or framework. Here, the aim is really to assess the effectiveness of your complaints handling process. Any persistent or high unresolved complaints signal to the regulator an ineffective framework, as well as a lack of capacity or poor responsiveness in the eyes of the regulator. In this instance, members should ensure that their complaints handling process is well documented and followed within the business and across the departments. It should indicate resolution timeframes, trend analysis, age analysis, as well as remediation measures. Things that may raise the interest of the regulator include low resolution rates, excessive upheld complaints, which may suggest systemic service failures, as well as a growing population of age unresolved complaints, as well as no documentation or documented investigations or resolution plan for unresolved items. And then moving on to subsection 9.3, which relates to resolution turnaround time. Here, the regulator is looking to evaluate resolution efficiency within your business. For example, delays increase customer friction, as you can imagine, exacerbate poor outcomes, and signal insufficient capacity or cultural weaknesses within your business. In this instance, members need to bear in mind that fast resolution, for example, within 5 to 10 days, indicates an efficient process and good customer satisfaction, whilst conversely, delays correlate with increased customer friction and onboard escalation risk. Systemic delays indicate inadequate capacity or governance issues within your business. In this instance, the FSA will potentially see the following as high-risk areas, where average resolution times exceed 20 business days, or a pattern of complaints exceeding 30 days without documented business rationale, as well as disproportionate delays in specific categories, which may suggest to the regulator process-specific bottlenecks. No evidence of turnaround time monitoring or management accountability would also be of concern. And finally, in this section of the return, subsection 9.4 relates to onboard complaints and outcomes. The purpose here is really to measure the proportion of complaints escalating to external resolution. High onboard complaints, especially customer-favored complaints, signal to the regulator deficiencies in internal dispute resolution and potentially widespread conduct issues within your business. In this instance, members should be mindful that the onboard escalation rate is a quality indicator, with high escalation suggesting internal resolution failures. Naturally, a high number of onboard complaints upheld in favor of the customer indicates validity of customer grievances. Escalation to the onboard creates reputational risk and regulatory scrutiny. Repeat onboard complaints in the same category indicates to the regulator a failure to remediate systemic issues. What the regulator will be looking at specifically in this portion of the return will be looking out for any high proportion of complaints escalating to the onboard, which suggests to them confidence loss in internal processes, again, within your business, as well as a high onboard upheld rate, which indicates conduct failures. A pattern of onboard complaints in the same category suggests to the regulator, or may suggest to the regulator, systemic issues that are not being remediated by your business. And that is section 9. Back to you, Sam, for section 10.
Thanks, Brad. I think just before I move on is also just to remind members that if you do have any questions, please feel free to include them in the Q&A. The chat functionality is currently turned off, and we will either look to answer them here or as part of our broader communication. So now moving on to section 10, IT and data governance and protection of information. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, this is probably the most unfamiliar or new or potentially challenging section of sections 7 to 12. This may or may not be data that you currently hold in your business. And the idea behind this section is to assess the cybersecurity posture of the business, the data management controls, and the resilience of systems supporting your critical services. And this is really, really an important section, and a bit like some of the aspects dealing with anti-money laundering, if applicable to you, because of the focus on the grey listing. And yes, we have been removed from the grey list, but we could go back on it just as easily. But South Africa has extremely high levels of fraud and a high risk of cyber attacks. And this impacts not only you, but your customers. So it's really important that you have proper oversight and control in this regard. We recognize that obviously we have members of varying different sizes, all the way from sole proprietors to very, very large businesses. And the types of controls that you will have in place will obviously differ. But those kind of things are important when you're doing your individual submissions, are to specify exactly what the issues are for your business. Because we don't stand in your shoes, you know what it is and isn't possible for you as an individual entity. So the first section, subsection 10.1, deals with IT governance findings and looks to assess the robustness of your IT governance and internal controls. And a high number of material or repeat audit findings would signal oversight deficiencies, poor remediation, and heightened operational or cyber risks. And we want you to really think about the following issues, because these would certainly raise flags with the regulator. And that would be a high frequency of material or critical findings, which would indicate governance control weaknesses, persistent repeat findings, which would suggest ineffective remediation so that you don't fix the problem and address it once and for all, and possible systemic issues, unresolved findings, so things that you've identified but you haven't fixed as quickly as you possibly can, which then create heightened operational and cybersecurity risk. And a pattern of findings also suggests under-resourcing or inadequate IT governance. Section 10.2 deals with data accuracy and completeness and looks to assess whether your business maintains accurate, up-to-date customer information. So strong data integrity underpins responsible financial services, and inaccurate or incomplete data increases the risk of poor customer outcomes. Important for you to think about here, inaccurate or incomplete data potentially undermines your money laundering controls, your TCF compliance, and customer service quality. Data quality issues often emerge from inadequate onboarding processes. So do you have the right controls when you're onboarding clients to make sure that what you're capturing in your systems and on your records is accurate and up to date, and that you have a process to review it on an ongoing basis to make sure that it stays up to date? Regular data validation and cleansing is absolutely essential. And we also need to bear in mind that the more systems you have, the greater risk you have, but also if you only have one system, that in and of itself can also create its own risk. So the FSCA will be looking at a high proportion of incomplete customer records, particularly things like missing beneficial owners. We know how much scrutiny there is from a FIC perspective to make sure that you have your controls in relation to money laundering up to date, your PEP status, and so on. Significant discrepancies between systems. So if your one system says one thing, but the data on another system says something different, that's going to be a big deal. The absence of data quality monitoring processes also are going to be a concern. Section 10.3, this is something very new, and this really deals with the emerging technology use. So to what extent are you adopting new technology in your business? And the regulator and we recognize that while new technology can improve efficiency, they can also heighten risks if poorly governed. There can be cloud concentration, AI biases, cyber exposure, and multiple unlinked systems increase operational complexity. So you need to be mindful that while cloud service adoption can improve the scalability and resilience of your business, it introduces third-party risk. AI or machine learning may improve efficiency, and we absolutely know that it does, but there's the introduction of risk bias or fairness issues if poorly governed, and rapid technology adoption without proper controls increases operational and conduct risk. So again, as we said, multiple unlinked systems create complexity and vulnerability. So the FSCA will be looking at rapid adoption of emerging technology, inadequate governance in relation to that, and insufficient testing or documentation, and new technology that might introduce data security or bias risks, and an over-reliance on single third-party technology vendors. In terms of Section 10.4, this relates to the system availability and incident impact. So you want to monitor downtime and the frequency of that downtime. Frequent, prolonged, unplanned outages signal weaknesses in business continuity and disaster recovery planning. So these are very important considerations for members, as system outages directly impact customer service and create reputational risk. And frequent or prolonged outages suggest inadequate infrastructure or disaster recovery planning. So the FSCA will absolutely be jumping all over anything where there's frequent unplanned outages indicating infrastructure inadequacy, prolonged outages which affect critical services, repeated outages from the same cause, and the absence of documented business continuity and disaster recovery procedures. Section 10.5 deals with customer data breaches. We know this is very important from a POPI perspective and looks to assess information security by monitoring the number of breaches and the data types that have been exposed as a result of those breaches, High or repeated breaches signal weak cybersecurity controls and increased conduct or reputational risks. As you'll be aware, any customer breach is serious and creates regulatory and reputational risk. So the FSCA may raise specific concerns if there are material breaches affecting significant customer numbers, repeated breaches, which would suggest persistent security vulnerabilities, delays in detecting or notifying affected customers. You need to act quickly when you identify a breach. Let customers know that their data has been shared as a result of a breach and what steps you're doing to address this and protect their data going forward. The absence of security controls that should have prevented a breach. So if you don't have the right systems in place and you don't have controls in place, that's also going to be a big flag for the regulator. And finally, Section 10.6 deals with the impact of data breaches. And this is to measure the direct effect on customers by monitoring the individuals impacted. Even a single breach affecting many customers signals major data protection vulnerabilities. So you're reminded that in the event of a breach, customer impact assessment is critical. Your compensation or remediation approach also demonstrates your commitment to customer redress and accountability. And repeated breaches affecting significant customer numbers warrant escalated regulatory response. Also, you want to look at post-breach security improvements because they're essential to ensure that it doesn't happen again. And then, obviously, the FSCA will be looking at breaches affecting a large customer population, multiple breaches over a period, as well as the absence of customer notification or remediation and post-breach security controls. And for those of you who may be worrying that you do not currently have this data available, the FIA has got you covered. So I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague, Bernard Libber, who's going to provide you with some brief information on our Member Shield offering. Be over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I appreciate that. And good morning to our members. I'm going to take a few seconds to discuss an offering from the FIA called Member Shield, which is specifically designed to assist FIA members within this space and others. But just to kick off, my name is Bernard, and I'm going to be quickly taking you through some of the Member Shield offerings and packages we have available. So at the FIA, we do understand, we hear it and we see it, and we understand how challenging it is or can be for financial services providers to implement and manage your internal IT cybersecurity. I mean, where do you start? What do you need to have in place? How much will it cost me? How safe is my client's data? And who do I call if I have a breach? So with that being said, we have partnered with First Consulting Alliance to develop Member Shield, specifically tailored for FIA members. So what is Member Shield? Member Shield is cybersecurity. We created and tailored this cybersecurity offering specifically for financial services providers within South Africa to protect against cyber threats. We are leveraging the collective strength of FIA members, which allows us to offer top-tier cybersecurity at cost-effective prices. These services include, and I'll go into some of them just for some good measure, next-generation antivirus. That's the security guard for your computer system. We also have endpoint detection and response, and that monitors your computers and other devices for signs of cyber attacks. Member Shield also includes unified endpoint management, and this can help you manage all your devices from a single place, as well as intrusion detection and prevention systems. Member Shield also offers web content filtering, very important web content filtering, and it helps you control what types of websites your employees can visit and which will be blocked, helping them not accidentally click on the wrong type of website. And then that follows into the secure web gateway. That's additional protection. So when someone does accidentally click on a harmful website, it prevents them from going deeper and opening up your network or your infrastructure to attacks. This one is very important, as we will know, mail security and compliance. We've all been phished or sent an email, here's the bank details. We've all seen that, please send me your personal details, emails come through. mail security is very important, and it's definitely one of the backbones of MemberShield. So we also then do take into consideration that not every business is the same. Sam mentioned it earlier in terms of the responses and input we get on this risk returns paper. And we are conscious that not every FSP is the same, which is why we created 3 bundled options as part of MemberShield. This actually allows you to get tailored solutions, and it gives us scalability and cost effectiveness for everyone's individual needs within their business. The 3 packages at a glance are the Essential Protection Plan. This is the starting point if you don't have anything really in place that you're aware of. The Essential Protection Plan gets you started on the right journey. What we are seeing is most members are opting for the Advanced Threat Defense Plan. That's the good, comfortable middle place there. It includes everything on the Essential Protection Plan, but it also adds a lot of additional services and offerings in that package. And then we can also offer the Total Security Suite. That is everything in the first 2 packages, plus some additional incident responses and more. These packages are customizable. As we said, we are conscious that not everyone's business is the same, so they can be tailored to your specific needs. And then just in closing, all FIA members have the opportunity to get a free consultation with the MemberShield team. So please do reach out to us at membershield@fia.org.za. There's a lot of challenges coming within this specific space, and we really want to make sure that we are at the forefront of it. So please go ahead and reach out to us if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, if there's anything you'd like to discuss. And then I do encourage you to book a free consultation with us so that we can take you through the offering, but also have a quick look at what you have in place. And that is it from me, Sam.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Thank you
B.
for the
That's a very
opportunity.
fabulous racing car you've got going there. I think you've been hacked.
Wrong screen. Yes, I've got 3 screens this morning to make sure I can have everything open.
No.
But the racing car, we'll get on to the next presentation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. And just for members, Bernard is here. If you've got any questions you'd like to pop into the chat on this, please don't hesitate. And he will be available to answer them there. But what we'll also be doing is sharing additional information with everyone when we send out the recordings. And then just back over to Brad to cover section 11, outsourcing and organizational capacity and skills.
Awesome. Thank you, colleague. Great. Outsourcing and organizational capacity/skills of your business. So the purpose here, members, behind this section is really to assess resource adequacy, staff capability, and operational resilience from outsourcing dependencies undertaken by your business. Once again, all monetary values in this specific section of the return must be recorded in South African Rand using the prevailing conversion rates. So subsection 11.1 of the specific portion of the return relates to vacancies. This section of the return relates to vacancies within your business. This is really about resourcing adequacy and organizational capacity of the business. For example, high vacancies relative to total positions indicate resource constraints, undermining governance, controls, and service delivery issues by the business. While temporary vacant positions are normal, the pattern matters here. The regulator will pay particular attention to chronic high vacancy rates across multiple functions, which may suggest to the regulator low compensation or poor working environment. Vacancies in compliance or risk management functions, which are core supervisory functions, as well as a pattern of key staff turnover, may suggest cultural or governance issues in the business. As we scroll down to 11.2, this relates to training. Here, the FIA is really looking to evaluate staff training on conduct-related responsibilities. The proportion of investment in conduct training relative to staff budget reflects a commitment by the business to building a customer-centric culture. So for this specific subsection of the return, members are really reminded that conduct training investment reflects a commitment by your business to customer-centric culture. Minimum conduct-related training for financial advisors and customer-facing staff is non-negotiable. So for example, the RE exam, class of business training, as well as CPD. Members are also specifically reminded that general staff should receive basic financial and AML training annually. This is not a once-off activity. Training frequency should also reflect regulatory environment changes, such as the upcoming transition to the Conduct of Financial Institutions, COFI, Bill framework. Apologies, Sam, I would be naughty if I did not remind members that the FIA actually provides complimentary online CPD for our members. Should you have any queries around that on our CPD platform, please mail questions at fia.org.za. That's a plug for that. So for subsection 11.2 of the specific portion of the return, the FSCA will also interrogate training hours or the amount of training spent by your business that are below industry norms. Minimal conduct-related training, which may suggest to the regulator that this is a low priority for your business, as well as where compliance certificates are either absent or have lapsed. These relate to RE5 or instances where your CPD is not up to date and where there's been no documented training on any new regulatory requirements or products for your business and its underlying staff. As we scroll down to subsection 11.3, this relates to outsourcing. Here, our regulator really seeks to determine the extent to which critical activities are outsourced by your business. Any over-reliance on outsourced services, especially for critical or control or core function of the business, actually elevates operational and servicing risks. This section also looks to outsourcing of compliance or risk management, which may create concern unless internal oversight is strong. IT outsourcing is common, but should include security control and business continuity guarantees. Any single vendor dependency is going to be risky in the eyes of the regulator, which, while diversification might actually improve resilience of the business. Aspects that the FSCA may scrutinize in this specific regard would include the outsourcing of core compliance or risk management functions with insufficient internal oversight, over-reliance on a single vendor, which potentially creates a single point of failure, as well as weak contractual protections or an absence of service level agreements across the spectrum. Vendor incidents affecting service delivery with poor incident response, and lastly, an inadequate transition planning for vendor exits. These all highlight concerns for the FSCA with regard to this specific section of the return. And that is section 11. Sam, over to you to take us home with section 12.
Thank you so much, Brad. And just as an additional plug on your mention of Kofi, we are hosting our Coffee with Sam and Brad session on the 18th of November, in which the FSCA representatives will be joining us to just give an update and also to discuss particular aspects that directly affect intermediaries. So please do join us for that session and get your team members to join as well. So then moving on to section 12, and this should be something that should be fairly familiar to you, this and fairly straightforward. But again, we reiterate that if there's data which you don't currently hold within your business that needs to be flagged and steps need to be taken to understand how readily it is obtainable, please make those comments in your submissions. The purpose of the section is to assess the financial health, sustainability, and funding resilience of the business, and where applicable, contextualize the institution within a broader group structure. So obviously only relevant if you're part of a group. Section 12.1 deals with revenue or turnover. And like we've said on previous sections, you need to record any monetary values in South African Rand using the current prevailing conversion rate. And the intention here is that they want to assess the scale and monitor the financial health of the business, and a lower proportion of turnover from financial services business would signal competing priorities, while larger discrepancies between projected and actual indicate planning weaknesses. Significant drops also signal financial distress. And as you can see in the return, it's split between your financial services related business and your non-financial services related business where that is applicable. So you do need to differentiate between the two. And key things for members to think about is that your revenue growth should obviously align with your business strategy and the market conditions. So significant gaps between projected and actual revenue would indicate planning weaknesses. and declining revenue may signal competitive loss or market contraction or reputational issues. And for those businesses that have both financial services and non-financial services businesses within their group, the financial services revenue proportion matters. So think about that when you are responding to this. So the FSCA will potentially look, as we've indicated, at revenue that's materially below projections, which would suggest forecasting inaccuracy, significant revenue decline year on year, a very small proportion of business from financial services, which would raise a concern about the deprioritization of regulatory obligations and the inability to reconcile revenue across reporting systems. Section 12.2 deals with expenditure and aims to evaluate the cost structures and financial resilience of the business. A high expenditure relative to turnover, which flags sustainability issues, while rapid expenditure growth, which outpaces revenue, suggests emerging vulnerabilities. And the FSCA would most certainly be looking at any expenditure as significantly exceeding revenue, rapid expenditure growth, underinvestment in compliance, risk management, or customer service, which would indicate cost cutting that compromises conduct, and an ability to account for or reconcile expenditure. So 12.3 is looking at funding, and they want to evaluate the financial risk and sustainability of a business. So high gearing or borrowing increases solvency risks, and funding concentration on few contributors also creates liquidity risks, while the source of funding may reflect the institution's resilience under stress. So the FSCA would look at high borrowing ratios. They would look at funding concentration, so from a single source. They'd look at short-term funding mismatched to your long-term business model. And they may also just look, and more significantly into section 12.4, where there's intergroup funding over reliance on that funding from group. So this section in intergroup funding is looking to specifically measure the extent of reliance on intergroup support. A high proportion increases the interconnectedness and contagion risks. And where applicable, businesses need to be aware that a high dependence on group funding potentially increases interconnectedness, because also group funding could be withdrawn if the group experiences financial stress. So what contingency plans do you have in place in the event of this happening? And 50% more of funding from group could potentially indicate excess intergroup dependency and may increase scrutiny from the regulator. And then finally, section 12.5 deals with organizational group turnover, and it looks to contextualize the institution within the broader group. So again, only relevant if you are part of a broader group or have various holding structures. If the financial services form part of a small proportion of group returns, this raises concerns around deprioritization as to other sections and of regulatory obligations. So the group financial health affects support available to financial services subsidiary, and ultimately group turnover provides context for understanding the sustainability and strategic importance of that financial service within the group. And that brings us to the end of all the specific sections. There is a final tab, enumeration, which is really sort of the data fields within the document, and not something on which you need to specifically comment unless there is a specific need. So just in closing, we really do thank you again very much for joining us for these sessions. We will, of course, be sharing them, plus all our other information that we've shared with you up until now. And we hope that this has given you some insight into the section and just things to think about. We know it's time consuming for you to sit within your own businesses and look through these line by line. So we hope that that's provided you just with some insight and things to think about. With regard to submitting your feedback, and this is fundamentally important, we have created a template for you to use to submit any comments to us. And we as the FIA will be submitting a consolidated industry-specific submission to the regulator using their particular template. We recommend highly that you do still make your own individual member submissions to the regulator, because we don't know on the ground what the specific impacts are on your individual business, and we certainly can't respond on the issues of 1,600 different businesses. We will look at this strategically, how it impacts small, medium, and large size members, where there are glaring anomalies, issues that need to be addressed, missing definitions. We will most certainly be commenting on those things. Where there's a lack of clarity, we'll be commenting on that. But we don't know whether you do or don't have the right cybersecurity controls in place. We don't know whether the information relating to your clients is or isn't available to you, and you will need to submit that. And this is the part that is really important. The FSCA will only accept submissions that are submitted by their Microsoft Forms template, and Brad's going to pop that up on screen to show you what it looks like. And what is really important about this is that you will need to populate this on a once-off basis. So we suggest use our template and then go in and respond to the FSCA and use the FSCA Microsoft Forms. And the reason that this is so important is that it does not have a save and continue feature. So if you partially complete your submission to the regulator and then you exit that form, it doesn't save. You need to make all your comments on sections 1 to 12 and the terminology at once and submit once. So do everything using a template beforehand and then input the data. We have raised the concern with the regulator that this is extremely unfriendly to the user and really acts as a deterrent to making submissions. But really, it is absolutely fundamental that you make your submissions and make clear the issues that are specific to your business. So we thank you for that. I'm not sure if there have been any questions in the chat that we need to respond to. We certainly do have time to look at those. Alternatively, we will be looking to address anything that's overarching within our submissions. And then finally, if you have any specific questions that you would like to direct to Brad and I, we've created a dedicated email address called omnifeedback@fia.org.za, and you can utilize that during this period to contact Brad and I to submit anything that you would like to in relation to this to us. Brad, anything we want to field now in the Q&A while we've still got some time?
Sam, yeah, just 2 questions from the question and answer section that I've answered. Just again, members will receive a copy of or link to both videos, today's video as well as last week Thursday's video, as well as links to our previous comms on the risk return, which includes a copy of the actual Excel spreadsheet risk return. So that will go out to members next week. And a question of clarity
to the FSCA template.
Absolutely. And just one other question from a member in terms of the complaints resolution section of the return was whether the FSCA was referring to reportable complaints. And it's something, Sam, you proactively raised. And I said, absolutely important and critical question, because that remains unclear. So that is a perfect example of a question for clarity to issue to the regulator. So thanks to the members for picking that up.
And it will form part of our submission, and it is,
Absolutely.
as I say, it is our understanding that it would purely be reportable complaints. But we have put that in as a query just for that clarity because it is not there.
100%.
If there are not any further questions, I thank you, Brad. I thank Bernard very much for popping in our session and just giving everyone that update on our member shield. And again, please do reach out if you have questions. The submission deadline to the regulator is the 30th of November. If anybody can get their submissions to us by next week, we will obviously have quite a number that we will need to collate and submit as part of that. And we will have to sit very much like you with everybody's submissions and create one submission that we then sit and input at once into the FSCA online Microsoft form, which is the only form that they will accept. They will not accept any paper submissions. They won't accept any emails. Their Microsoft form is the only form that they will accept. So if there's any uncertainty around that, please just give us a shout. And thank you very much, everyone, and good luck.
Thank you, members. Good luck with your submissions, and we look forward to receiving your commentary to us by next week, Monday. Thank you very much, members.